Hello, and welcome to Game Art Reviews. My name is Travis, and I will be your host. For our premiere episode, I want to take a look at the art style of No Man's Sky and why I find it often ineffective at complementing the core exploration-driven focus of the game. So let's just jump right in at number 4, Variety. So while the game does feature 18 quintillion planets that are all visually different, I know I'm not alone in thinking that they all feel extremely similar. And the best way I can describe it is that it feels like the game actually has one planet that's been reskinned 18 quintillion times. The difference between planets is more like the difference between character skins in a game like Overwatch or Soul Calibur than it is the difference between characters in those games. And, you know, it reminds me of when games like Soul Calibur would boast an inflated roster of characters, which it technically did have, but if you played Soul Calibur, weren't you always a little disappointed when you realized that some of the characters were mostly functionally identical, save for different skins and a very slightly altered moveset? No Man's Sky feels like that, times 18 quintillion, once you visit a few planets and realized how similar they feel to each other. And this goes hand in hand with number 3, predictability. So I don't want to underplay the technical marvel that Hello Games pulled off with their algorithm that allows players to fly mostly seamlessly from space down to a procedural planet, but players very quickly become adept at understanding how the algorithm superficially works. First, a planet is assigned one of a few kinds of fractal displacement maps, and then a theme is chosen for that planet: ice, jungle, barren, etc. Then the planet is assigned a main foliage type based on the theme. This could be a tree or a giant mushroom. Then the planet is assigned a main resource type. Many resources appear on all planets because they have to, otherwise the player could find themselves stranded. Each planet usually has one or two abundant materials that don't necessarily have to appear on each planet, though. These are things like gold or nickel. And just as a side note for super nerds, this reminds me of the great material continuum philosophy from the Ferengi in Star Trek, a species that seems to have at least partly inspired the Gek. And finally, the planet is populated with some critters and buildings that also feel like very similar reskins, and there you have it, a fully formed planet. Again, I know the reality is more nuanced than I've described here, but this is how players begin to feel that the visuals are predictable once we've seen a few planets and are able to form this mental map of the algorithm. Number 2 is believability. Human brains just have an innate understanding of how nature works and how it should look, but No Man's Sky often feels like it violates some rules of nature for the sake of trying to look cool, which I'm not entirely opposed to, but I do feel like sometimes it has a tendency to shatter people's suspension of disbelief in an almost subconscious way. So take a look at this planet with all these hollowed out square rocks all over the place. It doesn't feel right because the topology of a planet is sculpted by nature. Water, wind, rain, and other natural phenomena on the planet eat away at the terrain over time, causing it to look the way it does. But I don't see any natural phenomenon on this planet that could justify the terrain looking like this. It would require some kind of selective natural force that would flatten out most of the terrain but leave these giant rocks with 90-degree angles. And I appreciate that this is done to give more variety and make planets feel less predictable, which I did just argue was needed. And it was sort of effective at conveying the alienness of this world, but more in an unnatural, this shouldn't exist kind of way. And this is just one example. Caves feel like someone drilled them into the surfaces rather than feeling like results of natural forces. Some planets have snaking rock formations that natural forces wouldn't create. Trees are usually the same size, and therefore it seems like all foliage was created at the same point in time. There's no variance in age. Surfaces just jut out of the water without appearing to have been slowly shaped by changing tides over the centuries. And also there's islands in the sky, but somehow I don't find that quite as bizarre. I can sort of rationalize that, but somehow I have difficulty rationalizing other problems. I try thinking, well, maybe there's some force that exists in this universe that doesn't exist in ours, but I feel that that's sort of like reminding yourself that a lot of those terrifying, not quite human-looking robots are actually just robots. It doesn't stop them from feeling wrong on an instinctual level. And you could also argue that the Sentinels might have been responsible for some of this, I guess, but if that was the intent, they probably should have made that a little bit more clear to prevent people from feeling like the planets are unnatural looking. Okay, so let's get to the biggest gripe I have with this game. Composition. Composition refers to the placement of objects in a scene in a way that's interesting and artistic and evocative. What you don't place in a scene is just as important as what you do place. And composition is what lends artistry to a photograph or a 3D space. It makes it feel handcrafted and invites us to ponder the meaning of it. You know, what is the artist trying to say? What truth or insight does this space or photograph hold? No Man's Sky is unfortunately devoid of composition and therefore of meaning in its visuals. And to understand this a bit better, let's take a look at the box art for No Man's Sky, which has incredible composition. Planets hang tantalizingly in the distance. The low horizon emphasizes the enormity of the sky. Some objects are familiar, so we feel grounded in reality, but some are alien while still looking plausible, so we know this is a different world. A floating diamond tempts us to ponder if there's a metaphysical aspect to the experience. Ships are blasting off into space, inviting us to do the same. The character is small, back turned to us so that it gives us the impression of venturing out into the unknown. And there's just so much density of meaning here. And so here's what I would consider a representative frame of No Man's Sky. And I'm not saying that every frame and every space in a game has to be packed with artistic meaning, but there should be enough there to convince us that we should appreciate the game's visuals on a deeper level. And not just, yeah, it looks kind of cool, sort of like old sci-fi concept art. Now, I know the game is procedurally generated, and I have no doubt the team understands composition and tried to have their algorithm create as much density of meaning as they could, but the reality is, with 18 quintillion planets to generate, it's probably an impossible task until we can find a way for computers to generate visuals that feel artistic and not just algorithmic. And in a future video, we might take a look at good composition in a 3D scene. I do have one scene that always comes to mind when I'm thinking about this topic. So, that's the end of this video. Feel free to use the comments to further discuss the art style of No Man's Sky. It's great if you agree or disagree, because that just encourages discussion of the topic. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the like button or subscribe for more. I plan to create lots more what I would consider insightful videos on art and design in gaming.